This is Candid Conversations with Dr. Mayfield, a podcast that resources families and friends with tools to have important conversations about mental and emotional health. This show is sponsored by Mayfield Counseling Centers, helping you find clarity, hope, and purpose. Here's your host, Trever Shirin.
Thank you for joining us. We are excited to come to you. Today's episode is going to be a little bit different because we're doing a book club, essentially. One of the things that's common in the field of counseling is homework, which I'm sure a lot of you know about. And one of those homework assignments generally happens to be go get this book or read this book. And, we've found that reading books can be extraordinarily helpful to the growth and change process, and self-help books sell because they do something. They have to, otherwise why would they sell so many?
Well, there's a promise of something that might not be there, but you get a whole nother conversation for a different time.
And for some of you, you're like me, where these aren't the kind of books that you always read. However, I think that a lot of them are super helpful.
You read fantasy.
I read fantasy,
which is okay.
Which I think you can get a lot out of a fantasy
too.
book.
Right, I agree.
Just seeing the relationship between Legolas and Gimli, and understanding that
Lord of the Rings.
There's overcoming racism and history that's not your own. And anyways,
that's a whole nother podcast for superpowers.
Yeah. So today, Dr. Mayfield has brought in 5 books in no particular order that are, well, I'll let you say why you should pick up these books as a whole, and then we'll go through each one of them.
Well, they're books, but they're also, I think, authors. Because I think if you find one book from an author that you can get into, then you look at the other works of the authors.
Like Brene Brown.
Yeah, like Brene Brown. We're going to talk about Dr. Caroline Leaf today, Dr. Daniel Siegel, Kurt Thompson, Sean Acor. Then there's others, other books too that we haven't even going to scratch the surface that I would recommend on marriages and all those kinds of things. So
awesome. Okay, so book number 1.
Dang.
In no particular order.
I think this is just an interesting series of books. It's written by actually the individual that went through the traumatic abuse and survived, and it's just his story of how he overcame. And it's kind of I'm not sure if you've ever been introduced to it, but it's kind of a foundational book for the counseling field for people to understand trauma and understand this individual story. It's called a child called It, and then it's his story of overcoming his severe abuse by Dave Peltzer from his mother, where he was pretty much treated. The dogs were treated better than him growing up in California, and it was his story of overcoming and resilience and thriving. And then the second follow-up to that, which is great because he was basically called It in his family. No name, he was given the spoiled foods that the dogs wouldn't even eat, until the California authorities found him and rescued him. But then a man named Dave is kind of his redemption story of now I'm grown and here's how I'm living my life. And they're both international bestsellers. They're fantastic books. They're not a light read, nor are they happy-go-lucky. It's intense, but if you have somebody that's in your life that is coming out of trauma, who's experienced trauma, and you want to gain a little bit of an understanding of their story, and again, it's not, you can't compare apples to apples. It's a lot different, but kind of the foundational pieces to that. Again, I wouldn't leave the book laying around if you've got teenage kids. It's a pretty intense, pretty graphic recount.
Well, and it sounds like there's, at least if you're going through it, you get the benefit of seeing redemption in the midst of the story.
Right. I remember reading this. It was one of my textbooks in my master's classes, and I remember sitting there reading it and just weeping as I was reading it, going, this is this guy, what? This happens? This is this guy's story. And then when a man named Dave came out, how many years later was it? It was just fantastic. That one came out in, where is it? 2000.
2000.
So it's, again, kind of his, here's where I'm at now. And
Yeah.
I have a name, and it's good.
So a child's called It,
And a man named Dave.
Dave.
So those are more novel-esque type books, but not for the faint of heart. So
Book number 2.
well, author number 2. How about
Author
that?
number 2.
One of my favorite authors is Daniel Siegel. And for those of you that are on YouTube, you can see this one. It's called The Developing Mind.
And he's not any relation to Steve Seagal, right?
No. Yeah, no, I think he would probably smack you upside the head for that one. Dr. Daniel Siegel is a psychiatrist, neuroscientist out of California. But he's the one that has really taken a deeper look at the mind-brain connection, and really developed this framework called the interpersonal neurobiology, and it's the study of the brain and relationship. And he basically says that as a society, and this is spiritual, right? So as a society, we really don't have a definition of the mind. And as counselors, if somebody were to ask us, how do we define the mind? Most of us would look at them going,
or give the definition of the brain.
It's a good question. Or give a definition of the brain, which is the physical part of us, but the mind is the non-physical part of who we are, and it's what helps us recognize emotions and helps us understand our spirituality and our, all those kinds of things. And so he does a really good job. And this is more of an academic book, The Developing Mind, but he takes a lot of these principles. So this is basically his treatise or thesis on the mind. And then all of his other books, he's got books like The Whole Brain Child and No Drama Discipline and Brainstorm, which is an adolescent book. And what's the newest one? I've got it ordered. But it's all based off of this. And this is kind of the foundational work. But, I think for those of us that are interested in, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Is it the brain or the mind? He does a really good job of answering that. And then the author I'm going to talk about after this really takes that to the next level too. But his understanding of stuff really helps us go, okay, we actually do have control over and that's why I talked about these books, Dave Peltzer and The Child Called It, because he is a pure example of the mind overcoming terrible circumstances.
Yeah.
Another book that you and I have talked about a lot is A Man's Search for Meaning.
Yeah.
Right. And Viktor Frankl's ability to survive the Holocaust. And what he says in that book is that I made up my mind that they weren't going to take it.
Yeah.
They could do whatever they want to my body in these concentration camps, but they weren't going to take my mind. And there's something powerful to that if we realize we have control over our mind through choice, through thought, through going, okay, we've talked about this in the past, that if I do something to you, you don't have to react.
Yeah.
You can sit there and really think through the whole big picture and then be in control of yourself. And I think a lot of individuals think that their brain, the neurobiology, is actually in control of their mind. And if that's the way we look at things, how depressing.
Yeah.
If I've got a concussion, right, and I'm having a hard time putting sentences together, or I'm focusing or whatever.
That's it.
And if that's it. My brain was damaged. I can't do anything about it.
Right.
Or as I read through Siegel, and we'll talk about Dr. Caroline Leaf in a little bit, but I read through these books and I realize, oh, that's not it. My brain is plastic. It can grow and develop and change. It can heal. It can adapt. It can compensate. Then that concussion is just a concussion.
Right.
Right? But that's not how I think the greater world looks at it.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's so much power in being able to take control, because I think we can fall into what you're saying, where we just assume that the brain has control, and then it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Sure.
Where, now your brain is in control because you haven't I mean, the horse is in control of the carriage because you're not holding on to the reins.
Well, but think about this. Think about just societally. When a charismatic leader starts telling people that this is all they have,
Mm-hmm.
and they believe it, they think it, they believe it, now they're helpless. Now they're controllable. Now they're, I'm not going to get into a socio-political debate, but you think about across the timeline, even as far back as like Charlemagne or, some of the Roman Empire stuff to Manson to even Hitler, when we're convinced that we have no choice because our brain is our brain and we have no power over that. And we've been told that this is the way it is, and we don't hear it. I mean, this is the thing.
Yeah.
How many times have you worked with, or you've heard stories about, and I think you'll come into this as you do more counseling. But I've told numerous teenagers, hey, suicide doesn't have to be an option. They're like, wait, what? They just never, they've never thought that they're steeped in their depression. They're steeped in their mental struggle,
right?
And they realize that they think that's the best they can get. And when somebody tells them that doesn't have to be that way, it really challenges that paradigm.
Yeah, the power of choice. I remember early on in this show, I talked about a conversation I had with my sister where I told her, you don't have to be friends with anyone.
Right.
Like, you don't have to. You can choose who you want to be friends with. And in her 16 years or whatever it was at the time, she'd never heard anybody say anything to that effect where she has the power of choice.
Yeah, I don't have to come up to you and go, we're going to be friends. And you're like, oh, okay.
Right. And yet we do that with so much in our life.
Right.
We're told or we're given something and, yep, that's the way it is.
So if you're a parent of young kids, No Drama Discipline and The Whole Brain Child are really great Dan Siegel books that take this concept of the developing mind and apply it to working with smaller kids. If you've got teenagers going into adult, Brainstorm is a fantastic book that really helps take this idea of the developing mind and places it on the construct of a teenager. So, I mean, and then I think his newest book, like I said, I'll look it up and figure that out. But, just type in Dr. Daniel Siegel, and it's Siegel in Amazon or whatever comes up. But great stuff.
Yeah. Book number 3.
Author number 3.
Author number 3.
And this is no surprise to you just because of the impact that she's had in our community and on our practice. But Dr. Caroline Leaf is a fantastic cognitive neuroscientist originally out of South Africa, but she lives in Dallas now and has done a lot of her research through her own therapeutic processes, rigorous research. I think sometimes people call in to question her practices, and as you look at her stuff, it's evidence-based, it's rigorous, it's not kind of fly by the seat of your pants, but takes this idea that Daniel Siegel has talked about and goes, okay, the mind-brain connection. And she's Christian, she's has a faith, and really takes the connection of how God has designed our brain and our mind and this mind and this non-physical piece of who we are and how that controls everything. And so she really goes deep into this book called Switch on Your Brain, which is fantastic, on how our thoughts, either negative or positive, will affect our epigenetic. And we see this throughout science and throughout history that, think about it for those of you that are listening, when was the last time you started getting a scratchy throat and you're like, oh crap, I'm sick. And then a day later you're full blown. Or, oh, I got a scratchy throat. Let me go get some echinacea. I'll be fine. And the sore throat lasts maybe a day or so, but doesn't progress deeper.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the power of how we think. But to even take this further, we look at some studies in cancer wards across this country, and a recent study, I think it's most recent studies are 3 or 4 years old.
Right.
So, the research has lagged. But that close to like 96% of those in the oncology, so a cancer ward, had unforgiveness and bitterness. What does that say about how our bodies, how our mind affects our bodies? I think I've shared this story before of a former client many, many years ago that I had that couldn't feel their legs when they came in.
Right.
And, went to neurologists and, spine doctors and all this kind of stuff, and no cause was found. And then once we figured out it was trauma related and working through depression, once we started working through that, the feeling in the legs came back.
Yeah.
Right? How do you explain that beyond the fact that our thoughts and how our mind really does control how we operate? And that's hard, though. Like, and you and I have talked about this quite a bit, that it's not okay, I'm going to wake up today and I'm going to fix all this. It takes practice. It takes challenge. Dr. Caroline Leaf, has a 21-day brain detox in the back of her Switch on Your Brain, which really means that it takes around 21 days for us to create a new habit, to really lean into things. It takes persistence and consistency.
Yeah.
She's got that book. She's got, Eat and Think Yourself Smart, or Think and Eat Yourself Smart. She's got, Think, Learn, Succeed. But she's got a team of doctors that really help expand her research. And I really appreciate her too, because it fits a lot of what we do here at Mayfield Counseling Centers, is that we take a holistic approach. We don't diagnose first or second or even third. A lot of times we diagnose very minimally just for insurance purposes, but we don't diagnose to label. I think diagnoses can be a good framework for understanding somebody's struggles, but I disagree with the idea of putting it on somebody. We don't choose to go to medication right away either. It's a last resort type of thing. So her stuff is really good.
Yeah. So book number 4 or author number 4?
Let's do book number 4.
Book number 4.
I'm trying to think which one I'm going to do. I'm going to put these away here. This one, I think, has been really powerful for me personally, and I'll share a little bit why. It's called Living with Intensity by Susan Daniels. And going back to the diagnosis piece, most of you know my story of struggling with depression, anxiety, suicidality, and always feeling like I was kind of odd. I was an emotional kid. I was, felt things differently, saw things differently. But I was always, nobody could figure it out, right? And so I read this book probably about 3 or 4 years ago, and I almost wept throughout the whole thing, because it was like, this is me. And so Living with Intensity is this. It's a dive into the gifted child, and not from we look in our society, like, if I were to tell you somebody's gifted, what would be your initial thought?
Well, I think part of my first initial thought, like before I started getting more education around it, was like, so they're mentally disabled or handicapped. Like, that was kind of the direction.
That's one way, right? Yeah. That's one way. Another way, if you see somebody as gifted, is that they're super intellectual, right? So they're either got some disability, or they're super, super smart. And so we pigeonhole people into those two categories, where this giftedness is really a look at, and she talks about this in here, about Dabrowski's 5 intelligences of, we have emotional intelligence, right? You've met those people. I'm one of those people. I think you are too, to some degree, that can pick up on emotions in yourself, in the room, and it's uncanny. I can, it's almost like a party trick. I've done it before, and it's kind of vulnerable producing, but I could sit in a room and go, okay, I can tell you what everybody's feeling right now. That's emotional intelligence. And there's sensual intelligence, which is kind of the 5 senses, really, they can pick up on different things. Then there's intellectual, which is like, I'm going to be a savant in math or an engineer. Then there's imaginal. You met those people that have just a knack for fantasy. I would say that Brandon Sanderson has an imaginal intelligence, right? I mean, the guy produces some fantastic books. I would say that Tolkien and C.S. Lewis probably were intellectual and imaginal intelligences. And then there's psychomotor. And all of you have met those people that, you go, I'm a decent golfer. I'm going to go take my friend who's never played golf out and teach him how to hit the club. And in, 20 minutes, he's hitting it farther and better, or pick up the baseball bat and can hit, that's psychomotor intelligence. But in our society, we just really focus on the one. You think about our drive for success in our schools, where, right now, I think El Paso County is in the testing phase, and it's like, well, we want to see how smart our kids are. And that's how we base our funding. That's how we base all, ridiculous. So this idea of living with intensity talks about the 5 intelligences. They call it overexcitability, which really is saying it's I think it's a mislabeled, but it's what they've been using for so long. But this idea that we have a heightened sense of awareness, it kind of goes along with highly sensitive individuals, highly sensitive person type stuff. But there's a test that questionnaire that goes with this. We can put the link in our website, in the description. But I love this because it takes after you do the quiz. So it's not an evidence-based quiz, but it's a quiz that is kind of takes it to the paradigms of the book and then compares it to other people. Mm-hmm. And then you can read in here and go, okay, for me, I've got emotional, sensual, and intellectual intelligences. Well, I can read when I'm healthy what that looks like, when I'm not healthy what that looks like. So it's really a beneficial book that I give to my clients all the time.
Living with Intensity
by Susan Daniels.
Awesome.
So last one.
Book 5.
And this is, again, another author, but Kurt Thompson is fantastic. He is a Christian and has that worldview. So if you read it, just kind of take that into consideration. But he talks about the soul of shame. And I think we a lot of times don't realize
Which is the name of the book.
Which is the name of the book. But we don't realize that the stories that we retell ourselves really play into our own. It goes back to Siegel and Dr. Leaf and all of these others, that how we think, so we become in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And so he just talks through this fact that, he realizes in the church that there's a propensity for shame, whether it's self-inflicted or, organizationally inflicted. But what does shame do to the body? What does it do to the mind?
Yeah.
And it really takes on the same form as trauma. And so he's great. He's got a couple other books out there that are really good too. But really, when we have people come in, right, it's individuals that are struggling with something that was done to them, trauma, or ways we think about ourselves based off our circumstances, really. Yeah. And I'm not trying to dumb down mental illness, but mental health, but that's really breaks it down to most of the things are thought disorders and how we think and how we believe to be ourselves. And so if we can really overcome those things. Now, medical model might be a needed thing for some people, but I think we jump to that too quickly. And so these books are great kind of, okay, yes, and why don't you consider these things first?
Yeah. And I can see how all of these books would be helpful in an individual's worldview of those who are hurting or the way that we live and how we can support the people around us by having this understanding or a new perspective on things.
Well, think about it. What does the medical model say?
Let's get you.
Here's a diagnosis and here's some medicine.
Yeah.
But what if it's the person's story that needs to be told? What if it's trauma that needs to be resolved? What if it's, the medical model is actually hindering those things from happening? So these are, like you said, really powerful tools that people can use.
Awesome. Well, I hope that you pick up at least one of these books, maybe all of them if you're an avid reader and read faster than I do. And let us know what you think. Reach out to us and comment below on different books that you feel we missed that we should have included on here. We don't know all the books in the world. And
I could talk probably for another 2 or 3 episodes on all the other books I've got too, but yeah.
So let us know. Maybe we'll be able to talk back and forth about how awesome a book is that we missed on this list or a book that is on this list. And until then, we'll see you next week.
Thank you for joining Candid Conversations. If you would like more information, you can email candid@mayfieldcounseling.com or call 719-452-4803.